Thank you all so much for coming tonight. It's nice to see some new faces, some students, and we really appreciate you taking the time to join us here this evening. I want to just make one quick E&R announcement because we're doing so well in that area right now. Starting on the week of January 11th, we're offering 3 classes: Basics of Supply Chain Management, Master Planning of Resources, and Certified Supply Chain Program.
I got to stop you there. So
Okay.
CSCP is going to be offered in the spring now in April.
Oh,
So we
okay.
just got
A little adjustment, you have a little more time to prepare. But please, plan accordingly because those courses are very valuable, and as you all know, those certifications are terrific for your career and for your personal growth. So that's what we have for classes coming up. Always check our website because whenever there are changes or additions or deletions or extensions or whatever we'll be doing, that information is always available on the website. So please visit it regularly and keep abreast of what's happening at APICS Northshore chapter. Now, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our guest speaker tonight, Dr. Mark Chalkenham. He is the founder and president of Demand Planning, LLC. Mark has held various APICS positions and has had a long and successful alliance with the APICS organization. He probably knows the ins and outs of APICS as well as anybody. Mark has always had a unique and informative presentation. So without further ado, let me introduce Mark Chalkenham.
Thank you. All right, good evening, everyone. So I know now you are having dessert at this point, so probably followed by coffee. Right? So I'll try as much as possible to be not boring. Okay. So basically, Ken Glasser told me, well, you've been forecasting all your life, but I just want you to come and talk about something else, which is, and he gave you the topic, I hate forecasting. So basically, this is something that people do say periodically in their career, right, in the professional life, sometime or other, even if they are a forecaster. Do you agree? Because forecasting could be a thankless job. At the same time, it could be rewarding as well. Because forecasting is the one job where you get paid to be wrong. Right? Every month you get a paycheck, regardless of the fact that you're always wrong. So the one time you are perfectly right, you are 100% on, right? And that is the time that you want to tell your manager, honestly, I have nothing to do with it. Right? Because you don't want to be held to that standard again, because it's a fluke. It's a statistical fluke, right? You forecasted 28,525 pieces, actuals were 28,528 pieces. And you definitely have nothing to do with it, right? So forecasting is approximate, always. And approximate is good enough. But still there are situations where, there are problems with business forecasting, demand planning. There are perils in forecasting. And not because we are forecasting a catastrophe, right? Can we forecast a catastrophe? Could we have forecasted Hurricane Sandy? I think the weather forecasters actually forecasted Hurricane Sandy. How long ago? A week, maybe? Right? Maybe a week, yeah. But could they have forecasted that type of impact and loss? And not where it's going to land, right? The location, that type of stuff. They never thought Hurricane Sandy, a hurricane could land in the Northeast. Because I always thought we were all blessed, except for the snow. Hurricanes never come to the Northeast. Right? Is that true? Generally it's true, right?
No.
Almost. I remember we were all in Disneyland in August sometime, right? With the entire family having a good time. And suddenly the neighbor called, you better get back here. There was a hurricane. I don't know if it was the same year, Sandy probably, I don't know. But anyway, sorry?
Hurricane Gloria.
Yeah, probably, right? They said it was going to hit Boston. Yeah, it did. It didn't really. But anyway. So what we're going to do here is actually we're just going to go through certain situations where, there are traps in forecasting. And these are all situations that have happened in real life, particularly with clients. And what we have done in those situations, and what you should do in those situations, like our recommendation. And have any of you read the book, The Black Swan? Yes, okay. So, the black swan, what is the definition of a black swan? A black swan refers to what? A black swan refers to an unpredictable event. Right? Black swans are rare, right? I think black swans do exist, I think. But they are very rare, because you rarely see a black swan. Has anybody seen a black swan? They are very rare. So, black swan is a metaphor for an unpredictable event, an event that rarely happens. But when it happens, it just has this enormous power that changes life as you know it. That's a black swan event. So, some of these events that just completely changed throughout the history of mankind, right? Where things have, I think it's Ken Glass. So when life as you know changes completely and pushes you in a different direction, right? That's a black swan event. So that's like unpredictable event. Some of the catastrophes are. So I don't know if Hurricane Katrina, right? Hurricane Katrina. Would you say it changed New Orleans in some sense? Yeah, it was a very long impact on New Orleans. And I'm pretty sure people in New Orleans, their way of life has also changed since Hurricane Katrina. The way they are prepared for it, all that, right, has changed. So, black swan events, why are we talking about black swan events? They are unforecastable. Absolutely unforecastable, right? You have to be really God to forecast black swans. So, in demand planning and business forecasting, fortunately, our job is not to forecast black swans, right? Our job is to forecast regular course of events, business as usual, pretty much. But swans do happen, right? There are events that do happen, some predictable, some not predictable, some you could have predicted with some help from sales and marketing, but they don't want to help you, right? So there are events like that, right? That is possible, that's there. But you do have to plan for those events as well, and that's what makes demand planning difficult. But most of the time, demand planning is about predictable things, right? Business forecasting is about predictable things. And you could go a long way if you have a good system in place, and you have a system that has good algorithmic models, because that will solve majority of your job, right? That will just help you do majority of your work. I would say 60–70%. And then the next step is really to look through and talk to your friendly neighborhood sales guy to get additional intelligence about where we are going, what promotions are being offered. Most demand planners say forecasting promotions is very difficult. Right? Forecasting promotions is very difficult. True. But it shouldn't be, if you think about it. Because who's making the promotions? Who's doing the promotions? The company. We are doing the promotions. And we do know ahead of time, quite a bit ahead of time. Sometimes even before the year starts, we know about promotions, right? Because we have a promotional plan, it's funded by the company, we have all this. But for some reason, the communication doesn't happen. We can't promote, we can't plan for our promotions. So there are situations in companies that we have faced where even predictable things become complicated. Because either the process is not set up correctly, or the system is not set up correctly. And that is a big deal. System not being implemented right has been a big pain point for a number of planners. And that is true not just in demand planning, that is true across the board. Whether it is supply network planning, production planning, scheduling, what have you, system not being usable is a major issue, right? Large ERP systems, companies have spent millions of dollars on it. But the planners, you know, I hate forecasting, I hate SAP. I hate Oracle, right? Because it's making my job very difficult. I can't plan. I used to have an AS400 system that was like a charm, right? I had crystal ball that worked like a charm, and we paid a few $100s for it, right? Now I have SAP, I have Oracle, I have to forecast everything in a spreadsheet, and then I have to put all the forecasts back into my ERP tool, right? That's a very shameful situation. Right? So that's what happens, you know, when you just go in. It's a combination of things that make all these forecasting traps. So we'll talk about a few, and then I'm open to questions. You can just talk about your own practical experience as well. How many of you are demand planners or anything to do with demand planning? Some demand planning, okay. So forecasting is there everywhere actually, because you know it's not just demand planners who do forecasting. People who work in the warehouse do forecasting. Warehouse managers do forecasting. Purchasing people do forecasting, right? Because they need a forecast. Transportation, they need a forecast. They do their own forecasting. Ideally, they shouldn't be doing their own forecasting if the system is working well. Would you agree? Because it's an overall plan, a massive production schedule should really drive that forecast. But because either they don't trust it or because it's not working, they do their own forecasting in terms of, okay, how many people do I need? What do I need to do tomorrow? How many trucks do I need? I'm going to do my own forecasting. How many trucks do I need next week? It's based on how many trucks I used last year, same week, right? I'm going to do my own time series forecast. But that shouldn't be the case. If everything is working fine, your MPO should tell you how many trucks you need, right? Okay, so if you have any questions, please stop me at any time. I have an hour, so we can make it interactive. So one of the other things I read more recently was, not recently, I think it was like last year or year before, forecast accuracy. Forecast accuracy is an oxymoron, right? Forecast and accuracy don't belong together, right? So we do know that 100% is unreal, right? At the same time, the expectation is we are looking at error as well. We are looking at something manageable. So business forecasting, one of the fundamental principles is it is not a point forecast. If you say 28,000, the information is not complete. You also have to tell the receiver of the information, how much do you think the error is? What is the expected error? 28,000 is my forecast. I am fairly confident I'll be within plus or minus 10%. That's a very good piece of information to tell the receiver of the forecast. They can use it properly, right? Or you can say, I am fairly confident plus or minus 50%. So which means what happens? The band is wider. So they have to prepare for it. So essentially they need to keep higher safety stock if they think the forecast is not going to be right, if they have a higher interval. So forecasting, business forecasting is one place where you also need to provide a confidence interval, right? Not just a point forecast, but the interval, the upper limit and the lower limit, so that the receiver is better prepared. Because there are some items where your forecast accuracy is very high, and some items your forecast accuracy is not so high. So forecast is important, forecast error is important as well, because we know that forecasts always are inaccurate. Right? There's going to be a degree of error associated with every forecast. It depends on how big that error is, right? That's what matters. Okay, so let's just talk about business forecasting, right? Business forecasting as a process, specifically demand planning, is important because, and it has become very important, over the last, I would say, 10 plus years, because supply chains are focused on two things. Optimizing inventories, right? You want to keep the lowest inventory possible because inventory costs money and improve customer service level. So which objective is more important? Inventories or customer service? Depends on who you ask, right? So you ask the planner what is important to them. A supply planner, inventory planner. You ask the senior manager what is important to them. I guess it depends on when you ask them too, right? Most senior managers would go with this, because they would rather want higher customer service levels. Right? At the same time, they wouldn't want to just have inventory bloated, right? Your warehouse full of inventory, because that's a problem also. Right now, people have less emphasis on inventory because of the fact that inventory costs a little less, thanks to Janet Yellen and the Federal Reserve, right? Because interest costs are very low. So a lot of senior management, a lot of controllers, inventory is not as much in the radar as it otherwise should be, right? Because inventory doesn't cost much. I can get a loan for 4%, 5%, right? Inventory doesn't cost as much. But it still has storage costs involved as well, so inventory is still an issue. Other thing that will happen when you have poor demand visibility is expediting costs, right? You have to expedite the raw materials, working process, working overtime, what have you. That's another cost as well if you have poor demand visibility. So there are several issues that may inhibit a demand planning process. And one of them is how an organization has defined demand planning. Right? How an organization has defined demand planning. So we actually define demand planning in all our workshops this way. Demand planning is the art and science of planning customer demand to drive holistic execution of such demand by corporate supply chain and business management. So just a couple of things to note. One is planning customer demand, right? That's what matters. It has to be customer focused. You are trying to forecast what the customer wants next period, next 3 periods, next year. Customer demand, right? Just purely customer demand. And more recent work, right, there is a lot of emphasis on demand-driven planning. And demand-driven planning essentially means looking at the ultimate consumer's information. So if you are supplying to retail, you're looking at point of sale, sell-through, right, what the consumer buys. It's not what you ship to the retailer, but what your consumer buys from the retailer, right? Ultimate sell-through. And it'll work in every industry, right? Even if you're in a B2B, ultimately what is actually pulled out, you are making automotive parts, and you are really looking at what is the demand for cars when you are trying to manufacture or put a strategy together to manufacture parts or components for the automobile industry, right? And execution by 2 different parties. You would ideally want to have 2 customers. One is a supply chain, which we all know because we are all part of a supply chain organization, right? We are all part of APICS. So we know that the chief customer of forecasting is the supply chain, supply planning. But we don't want to stop there. And that's where IBP comes in. Heard of IBP, right? IBP, Integrated Business Planning, right? Integrated Business Planning. And some say it's actually a glorified S&OP process. So basically saying, I want business management also to use my forecast because I am the only shop in the company that produces detailed forecasts at the SKU level. And I want management to use my forecast. Will senior management use my SKU level demand plan? They won't use it at the SKU level. What if I aggregate to brand and product family level? Will they use it? Yes, they will. Because it is actually a more intelligent forecast, provided you are using the statistical models, the tools right, and gathering all the intelligence. It is an intelligent forecast because it is coming from the detail, right? But there is one other caveat. For management to use a forecast, can you present that in units? You have to present that in dollars. You have to present that in revenue terms. So that has been another challenge with most demand planning organizations. They forecast in units, that's it. They don't make the attempt to look at revenue plan. Because for management to use it, it has to be dollarized, it has to be monetized. And so that gap is filled by who? That void is filled by?
Accounting.
Accounting, right. And they have no clue about SKU level demand planning. Once in a while they'll ask you, Sally, can you send me your forecast? They'll take a look at it. I'm sorry?
I work in accounting.
Yeah. So you do get SKU level demand planning?
No, I actually end up doing a lot of the forecasting, so our demand planning is a little bit different because we're, of course, outsourced.
Okay,
So we have a different approach in terms of how we get our products manufactured.
I got you. Okay. So, and then when they make up the numbers in finance or accounting, I mean, they're going to start from the family level or brand level in dollars. So if there is a disconnect, nobody knows. Because our plans stay at the SKU level. Accounting's plan starts at the family level in dollars. We haven't translated ours into dollars. They didn't try to translate their dollars into units. So there is a big disconnect. Right? And that is a big issue. Because that is what causes the disconnect in the S&OP process. Management is planning on their own, and we are all running the factories on our own. Right? And that is a big disconnect when it comes to S&OP. Okay? And that's where this integrated business planning comes in, right? Just to make sure that everybody is planning off of the same numbers. And that will not happen, at least that's what my company preaches. That will never happen until you make the dollarization complete, until you make the monetization complete. If you are shying away from doing that, you can guarantee this will happen, right? The disconnect will always exist because you can talk the talk. Oh, everybody plans one number. Management will rarely want to see units, right? There are exceptions. We work with the food company. They love to see pounds of potatoes. Everybody understands pounds of potatoes, right? So CEO understands pounds of potatoes. In fact, CEO understands pounds of potatoes better than dollars because it's a potato company. They make French fries. Everything is converted to pounds, equalized pounds. And they present, even at the sea level, they present pounds of potatoes, right? Exceptions do happen. Okay? So essentially two things happen. One is the algorithm, which carries you all the way, most of the way, 60%, 70%. Second is shared intelligence, which is consensus collaboration. You talk with sales and marketing, and then finally you also have consensus, which is kind of a coming together of minds on the demand side, which would be sales, marketing, finance. All these folks have to come together and say, yes, that forecast looks good, that forecast looks right. So demand planning, you just want to make sure that all of these different components exist when you define demand plan, right? So that the users know what is it meant for and how it's produced. And also other things happen in terms of how often do you forecast, how often you reforecast. And what is your forecast horizon? How much do you provide the forecast for? How long do you provide the forecast for? 24 months, 18 months? Is it monthly or weekly buckets? All of this have to be spelled out in a forecast agreement. If we don't, then there are more issues down the road, right? In terms of how, because it will take a life of its own. Okay, so let's just talk about different pitfalls. Pitfalls we have seen with our in our client experience and what we've done and what you should probably do. I don't know if you relate to this. Just raise your hand and tell me. So first issue, data. So am I using the right data? Or what are the problems with data? So data, you may use too much data. So when you have too much data, there's probably a lot of noise and outdated historical numbers. So if you're using 10 years worth of data, whatever happened 6, 7 years ago doesn't matter at all because things have changed. That's too much. So on the other hand, you can have too little data, right? Too little data, difficult to capture any pattern. I have seen in this one company, IT department said, we can only give you 1 year's worth of data. So every year, everything is wiped out, the planners only get last 12 months. And with a lot of requests, they actually changed it to 18 months. So that's too little data. Because if you have 12 months worth of data, what can you do? Most algorithms would fail. Because it's too little. Even to get a decent statistical derivation, right, you need a sample of 30 plus. So typically we recommend 36 months, right? So if your statistics does not work, then you have other problems. What do you have to do? You have to manually do everything. Then you have to depend on the judgment of many people, including your own. You have to use your judgment. Which you're like, oh my God, I'm a very algorithmic planner. I don't trust my own judgment. And you have to use the judgment of everybody else, sales and marketing. It'll be a polling, right? You will be polling people to what they think, and it becomes a completely judgment-driven forecast. So think about this example, right? This is a real example. So here we have used 5 years worth of history in a very popular forecasting package. And what we get is a forecast that looks like this. Long period of time. Long period of time, patterns might have changed. So when we just say, you know what, I am going to limit the number of history periods that I give, and then I say, well, I'm going to use only the last 25 months or so, then I get a little bit more pattern, right? Slightly better forecast. Because it's too long a period. So here, what we have seen in practice is systems limit what people can do. Because systems don't give you the flexibility to change how much time horizon you can use in your forecasting. I mean, this is very easy, right? No brainer. Oh, I can just go in and just say, okay, I'm going to delete all these observations. You can do this for one SKU. If you're forecasting 5,000 SKUs, how are you going to do it? That's where the real problem comes in, because your system is not correctly implemented, or the right functionality has not been leveraged, turned on, or the system does not allow you this flexibility. All systems do forecasting, but all of these little things matter, right? A system that flexibly adjusts how many periods I'm going to use to create the right forecast is a very good system, or allows you that option to do that, right? It's a much better system. Now think about this one. Too little history. You only have 1 year's worth of data, right? Just 1 year's worth of data. So what do you think the forecast will look like? Yes, Linda? It's going to go up. We have one answer for it. It's going to go up. Anybody else? Okay, Kevin also says it's going to go up. Anybody else with a different opinion?
You're missing any seasonality.
Right. What if this is actually just a seasonal pattern, right? So one option is it's going to go up because I see trend. But on the other hand, what if this is actually within the year? January is a low month, December is a high month, right? And we know that is the case. December holiday buying, right? So in that case, it actually repeats itself. Your pattern actually repeats itself every year. So with 1 year of data, you cannot conclude whether this is correct or this is correct. Because every time you need some type of confirmation. Right? 1 year is too limited a time, too short a time to decide on what is going to happen in the future. Of course, spuriously it looks like, it is going to go up. Because I see from January to December it's going to go up. But not true. Because that is within the year, you have a seasonality. The other issue that we have seen, again, it looks very simple, solvable. But when you have a system that doesn't recognize it, you have a big problem. We have seen in a $45 billion oil company that they made this mistake. Zeros versus nulls. Are they different? They are different. Zeros and nulls are different things, right? Zero means zero demand, right? Null, we don't know. It could be zero. It could be a missing observation. We don't know. And how about the systems? How do they treat zeros and nulls? You may want to try this as your homework tonight, right? In Excel. plug in a bunch of numbers, and then put some nulls and then calculate the average. Make them zeros, calculate an average. What do you think? The answer would be completely different. Completely different. So leading zeros, right? Leading zeros can be ignored. Leading zeros are the same as nulls. Before the product is launched, you don't care whether it is zero or not, because it is irrelevant. You only try to use the data after the product has been launched, right? When the product is active. Nulls in the middle of the data, because some systems present the data as null or zero. But if they are in the middle of the data, then they are valid observations. You should tell the system to convert it to zero. If you don't, you're going to have this issue. Because if you keep them as nulls, what will happen to the average? Average goes up. Average goes up. And this is the problem that we noticed in that $45 billion oil company. Right? They had created, their averages were all inflated because they had omitted the zeros in the middle of the data. Because when they pulled down the data in Excel spreadsheets, the null ones didn't come down, right? Because it just didn't show up. So which means when you average it, your demand is higher, right? Your demand is higher, safety stock is higher, everything is higher, right? And then when we made this change, they're like, Mark, you're God. Now we can operate with less inventory, yeah.
The other thing that we learned in the past is if you only can build 100,
Right.
or sell 100, you might have had demand for 300, but you couldn't sell it because you didn't have it. So then it looks back and says, oh, you only sold 100.
Absolutely.
So you end up missing it next year because you didn't put in your potential.
Absolutely, absolutely. That is how you define demand itself becomes a big issue,
Right.
right? So the customer wants 300. You only have 100. So you shipped him 100. So if you capture that as your demand history, then you're going to forecast 100 in the future. That's a big problem. So that's where this definition of demand comes in. Should you use orders, customer orders, or should you use shipments? Which one is the right proxy to define what your history was?
We also had this categorized blowouts. You know, when I worked in a food company, if something was getting low, you sold it to, you know, Pine Street Inn or something at a very discounted rate, but it still shows as a high sale.
Right. Or liquidation.
And it was
Liquidation
a
sales.
blowout sale, so you
Right.
gotta knock those down also.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things that.
So you have to do
manually
data
enter.
scrubbing, absolutely. I mean, that is one thing that you have to do because it's a different type of sale. Because it's not demand, you're just liquidating. It is a supply. So you have to really look through and make adjustments. So that's a very good point. So, you know, one of the things that we recommend as a best practice in any demand planning process is the demand planner should have the ability to correct history, the historical demand, so that they can make sure the right stream of data is passed for statistical forecasting. Otherwise, garbage in, garbage out. You can have a very good engine. The engine is going to struggle. Like, oh my God, you've been selling average 300 pieces every month, and suddenly you're selling 4,000 pieces because of a liquidation sale.
Or in taking this 300, you're only shipping 100.
Yeah.
If the customer's system can't handle a back order and they eliminate that 200 and replace the order, now your demand is 500.
Yeah.
Still only shipped 100.
Right. So all of those things, you know, I think so that is actually a big challenge in companies, like demand, you know, trying to define true demand. In fact, I have a white paper on true demand. There are additional issues because if you go with orders and if you have a short supply situation and the customer senses that, then it could happen the opposite way. Customer wants only 300, they order 3,000. Right? Because they are just like, they know that you have a short supply, so they want to get ahead of the queue. So they just really inflate their orders. So what would you do? So you have to really kind of like, you know, balance this out. And it is an algorithmic exercise in terms of trying to define what the true demand is. You know, so all of these things have to come together, especially with respect to data. If you're using statistical algorithms, data has to be good. Right? You have to use the right processes to scrub clean data, whether it is big data or small data. Okay, so trailing nulls are zeros, same as zeros, but good statistical packages should sense that and potentially flag and forecast a discontinuance of the product, right? If you have 4, 5, 6 months of zeros, the last 6 months of zeros, most forecasting packages will give you a forecast of 0 in the future, right? Which is actually, you can just be proactive and call marketing and say, are we discontinuing the product? Do we have too much inventory? What is our strategy here? So zeros and nulls, big deal, right? Trying to understand correctly, define it correctly. We understand manually, but do the systems understand? Have the systems being set up right? Because otherwise it will be tricky, right? It could be tricky. So planners should have the ability to edit and correct history for statistical forecasting. History is not like rewriting the history. Obviously, the original history is going to stay the same. But planners are going to correct the history, which would be used for statistical forecast because they have more intelligence on what exactly happened, including outliers such as liquidation sales, including some of the issues with shipments versus orders, those type of things. Okay, so another pitfall. This is the one, in one particular case, there was an alarming situation, right? My MAPE is negative. For some of you who are not demand planners, MAPE stands for mean absolute percent error, which essentially is the forecast error, the degree of error in a forecast. And we call it MAPE, mean absolute percent error, because it doesn't matter whether you under forecast or over forecast, you will be penalized either way, right? It is a hit, it is a strike against you if you under forecast or over forecast, doesn't matter which way. Because they both have their costs. If you over forecast, too much inventory. Under forecast, customer service is hit, right? So both of them need to be taken into account. That's the reason why the error we measure is absolute error. So we accumulate positive and negative errors together to say how bad the forecast is, or how erroneous the forecast is. So technically, absolute can be negative. Can it be negative? An absolute value can never be negative, right? Absolute value can never be negative. But still we had this complaint, right? MAPE turned out to be negative. So, negative MAPE, right? So, a negative MAPE indicates a process issue. So essentially, this will happen if your demand is negative. That's the only way MAPE can be negative. If your demand is negative, observed demand is negative. So, when would demand be negative? Can demand be negative? Demand history? Shouldn't be, right? When there are returns, it could be negative. When returns are higher than your shipments, it could be negative. Correct? So, you have only returns, no shipments. Or you have too much returns, very few shipments. So, you have a negative demand. So, the question is, should returns be in your demand history? And I have to tell you, in my experience, in my consulting experience, I mean, I've been in corporate before, so since 2004, right? So basically 10 plus 11 years. This is the mistake most often companies make. So the question to you is, should returns be included in your demand history? Most companies don't think about it, right? Do you think it depends?
I think it depends.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else?
No, I would think no, that's right.
Okay, Kevin is saying no. Anybody else? Ken?
If you didn't replace them, and they just returned them, you shouldn't know your net demand.
Right, that becomes your net demand, right? That becomes your net demand, yeah.
Shouldn't you have like a built-in, like, historical figure that you build into your forecast?
Probably, right? Returns is a separate animal, right? So think about this, so a customer typically returns 20% of what they buy. Okay? So you ship them 10,000 units a month, they return 2,000 units, either the same month or the next month. Every month it happens. It's very predictable. So when the customer orders 10,000 in November, can you tell them, you know, listen, I'm only going to ship you 8,000? Can you tell them that? So return should not be in your demand history. You have to make 10,000. You can just tell the customer, sorry, we don't want your business. Right? Sorry, we don't want your business. Take your business someplace else. This is not the company for you. Right? But we can't tell them, we will only supply 8,000. They will look someplace else. Right? So regardless, when their demand is 10,000, you have to make, plan, and stock 10,000 to be shipping 10,000. So which means returns should never be part of your history. Returns should not be part of your history. So you have to use what is called as gross demand. The fact that demand is negative means returns are buried in it. And as Caroline says, yes, we do have to forecast returns separately. Why? And maybe not you. If you're a demand planner, it's not your job to forecast returns, unless your management is willing to pay you a little bit more money. Right? So returns forecasting should be somebody else's job, because returns forecasting is important for one purpose, for financial planning. The controller, they want to say, what is my realizable forecast? The GAAP number, right? GAAP is generally accepted accounting principles, right? The GAAP-based number I have to provide to my stockholders. I have to recognize returns, and the only way I can do that is I need to forecast returns. But not for supply chain planning. Because if I forecast net demand and give it to supply chain will always be short. Especially if returns are high. And when we point out to companies, some companies say, you know, returns are very insignificant. They're like 0.5%, right? So that's okay. So we say okay, right? But if returns are significant, even, you know, I think even 0.5% I think is significant, right?
It's all in one product.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so basically, it's not that MAPE is negative, that is just a symptom of the underlying cause. Right? MAPE is negative, it's just a symptom of the underlying cause where the process is incorrect. Okay? So basically, I think let's just, let's skip over this. So if you think about demand history being negative, then that actually is the tip of the iceberg. The real problem is returns are corrupting your demand. Demand should always be gross demand, right? It has to be gross demand. Okay, so who is using your forecast? How often should you be releasing your forecast? Or is it the fact that you're forecasting just for yourself? I like forecasting and I like the numbers. I like my huge 27-inch monitor / TV. And I like the beautiful patterns the software is producing. The graphics are great. So I come in here in the morning with my Starbucks coffee, forecast all day, and then go home. Who's using the forecast? I don't care. I am forecasting for myself. And we don't want that case, right? We do want to know who is using the forecast, because I am forecasting for somebody, right? So the forecast actually has to go somewhere, and that's what is called as a forecast pass, right? Or, SAP users call it a forecast release. So the forecast does, there is the release of the forecast each month, okay? So the forecast has to go to somebody. Typically, it goes to who? Every month, systematically, it goes to the supply chain, right? The supply chain. Supply planning needs to get the forecast, right? So when do they get the forecast? Any demand planners? Anybody who is passing the forecast on a specific date, like day 5, day 10? Second week?
Tuesday of, yeah.
Second Tuesday of each month, very good. Second Tuesday of each month. Set schedule, second Tuesday of every month, I pass the forecast. I'm done with it. After second Tuesday of the month, I'm going shopping, right? I'm going to go play golf. I'm done with my forecast until it becomes the 4th week, right? So second Tuesday, supply planning gets a forecast and they start their engines trying to set the master production schedule, run the MRP, blah, 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 all that stuff, and wow, they make the product for shipping out that month. So second Tuesday of each month, I'm releasing the forecast to supply chain, specific agreed upon schedule. So the problem is companies don't define it right, and that could be a big issue. Right? That could be a big issue that they don't know. They know that things are not working well. They don't know why. Right? Some companies pass the forecast every week. And sometimes it's just like overboard. It's almost like, death by forecasting. Right? Because some companies want, some supply planners say, you know what, pass the forecast today. And a couple of days later, it's like, no, I don't have anything to do. Pass the forecast again. Right? So they have a forecasting fetish, right? I don't know, sometimes I think if supply planners cannot do their job, they like to see different numbers every day. So that is what I call as passing the buck. They pass their job to who? To the demand planners, right? So if you just say every day pass a new forecast, that means what happens to your supply plan? Supply plan becomes chaotic. And you say, well, you know what, demand changes every day, so I want you to pass a new demand plan. That's not forecast, right? That's reacting. So that is a problem that we have seen. Companies pass every week. At least every week is okay. If you are really a fast-moving food company, you have a lot of perishability problems, it's okay. But sometimes it's like almost every day. There's a new order, pass the forecast. You can pass the forecast for that particular order or a few SKUs that are going to be affected by it, maybe ad hoc pass. It's called an ad hoc pass. But just because one customer ordered 10 products, you pass the entire forecast of 20,000 SKUs, again, means I don't know if there's any reasonable supply planning taking place. And then I've seen another case where they don't pass the forecast at all, supply planning. And I was just blown away. It's like, oh my God, you don't pass the forecast supply planning? And they say, no, we don't. But if supply planners are really interested, they have access to our system. I say, wow, really? Yes, they log in and they look at the forecast and plan. So I thought that was really fascinating, That's like almost, so it is like demand planners don't have any sense of privacy in that case. Whatever I do, if I have work in progress today, right? At night, the supply planner logs into the system and says, okay, that's my forecast. I'm just experimenting with a model, a new model. Now that is in production. A new model forecast is blowing up. I'll correct it tomorrow morning, and that is now in my master production schedule, right? So that's not a good practice either. So problem is you just want to define when do you pass. Too frequent is not good. Never is not good either, because never means you don't really have any finite time frame of when you finish your forecast. You keep on forecasting, right? It's like the Kramer typing in a Seinfeld show episode. That always keeps me laughing. He just keeps on typing. He doesn't know what he's typing. So you forecast all day. So ad hoc pass. Ad hoc pass is a good one. Which is ad hoc pass is just a limited set of items that you pass. Limited set of items. Only those that have changed on demand. Otherwise, you want to define when you are passing the forecast at a specific interval. Okay, so best practice that we normally recommend is essentially you could have a preliminary pass second Tuesday of each month, right? And then you could have a final pass perhaps at the end of the month. The reason why you want to have a final pass is because the forecast goes through the S&OP cycle, right? The monthly S&OP cycle. And the monthly S&OP cycle contains what? The monthly S&OP cycle is you have the demand consensus meeting, and you have a supply consensus meeting, right? And then you have a pre-S&OP and an S&OP, right? Are you familiar with this S&OP cycle? 3 to 4 meetings every month. So when you are done with the pre-S&OP, that's when you say, hey, everything is good, this is my final pass, because everybody has agreed on it. And we should expect very few changes between preliminary and final pass, unless you have something you're sharing, or there is a black swan on the horizon, right? So there should be not very many changes. And then obviously best practice is to have an ad hoc pass, which is an exception-oriented pass. Only exceptions are communicated to the supply side. Otherwise, supply planning should be rigorously defined, because what are the different things that they have in their own command, right? Supply planning. If demand changes, what can they do within the month? They have consumption rules, right? Supply planning driven by consumption rules. So if demand is tracking faster, I have certain things that I can do, potentially. Can demand planners do better than us? If they know that, right? Just because you're overselling a specific SKU doesn't mean demand planner knows what's happening. Because they have to go through the same due diligence, right? They have to call the customer, they have to call the sales guy to get the information. Okay, very good. Promotions. That could be another trap. Too hard to handle, right? And the confusion here is not about the difficulty in promotional planning, but being able to distinguish what is the promotional volume, what is the baseline, right? I mean, obviously, forecasting promotions is a challenge, is difficult. But here, the issue here is that promotional plan, promotional volume could be potentially double counted because of the methods that you're using. So let me just give you an example. An event, a promotional event happens, let's say Easter. Every Easter it happens. And when that happens, your sales guy says, oh, we have a promotion, we're running a promotion this time in April, whenever Easter is happening. And we think there's going to be a 30% lift. The question is, 30% is good, but 30% on what? He doesn't have a clue. Right?
Might already be captured in your
Exactly, right? It is happening every April. You're running a statistical model. What do you expect? It is already captured in your baseline. You run the model says, every April I see this. I'm going to put a seasonal peak in this. If you put a 30% on top of that, then you have an issue, right? So think about something like this. So when you say 30% on top of something that the seasonal model captured, that's over forecasting. And this could be potentially a big tug-of war between sales, marketing, and demand planning. Because demand planning says, no, that's not true. We are just going to really over forecast here. And you end up carrying a lot of promotional inventory. Sales and marketing would refuse. But no, it's 30% on top of the volume, 30% on top. On top of what? Nobody can agree on baseline. So you have to differentiate you have to distinguish what your baseline is. You have to define what your baseline is. Right? You have to define what your baseline is. So one of the things that we have done is, we have done what is called as like for like, right? So like for like modeling is basically saying, if a promotion happens in the past, we assume that the promotion happens in the future as well, in the same month. So the stat model is your first cut that gives you the full forecast, not baseline. We are not going to talk about any type of bogus baseline here, right? It's not going to be semantics. It is going to be a full forecast. Promotion happens in the past, we're going to assume it's going to happen at the same time, next year, same promotion, we're going to model. Now you tell me not about an absolute promotion, you tell me what is different about your promotion from last year. Same promotion, change timing, then what am I going to do? I'm going to shift it. It happened every year in March. This year it's going to happen in April. I'm going to shift it 1 month ahead. But the peak and all that stuff is the same volume that's estimated by the stat. Right? Same promotion, like for like modeling. I'm using stat. There is no baseline. It's a full forecast. I am just changing the timing because you tell me so. Now, I have promoted every month, every year, but I haven't promoted this year, then I'm going to dial it down. Obviously, the sales guy will not agree to that, right? But typically when they tell their management, they'll say, if you don't promote, sorry boss, we're going to lose the volume. Typically they would say that, and that is true. So you already have the volume, you have to dial it back. So this is much simpler than trying to come up with an artificial baseline and adding a 20%, 30%. I mean, where did they come up with that? We have no idea. And we have seen actually in one particular case, the sales guy is talking with other sales guys, like, particularly brokers. When the brokers say, oh, it's 40% lift, and the sales guy says 40%, 40%, now how can I put this volume? Not 40%, they'll just give you an absolute number. It's going to be 30,000 units on top. And you look at the number the sales guy is thinking is about 25,000, so which means they make the baseline negative. Right? They go in and put a baseline of minus 5,000 because the system needs to have a baseline. Because the salespeople are also thinking about a total number, right? And they show the 30,000 as promotional volume. So I asked them, okay, why are you showing it as promotional volume? No, bonuses, everything is based on promotional volume. So your baseline is negative 5,000, promotional volume is 30,000, you get a commission. Right? So, okay. Sales intelligence is an oxymoron, right? And ironically, most demand planners think so, right? Because that's kind of a travesty, That's saying it's not a travesty they're reporting to supply chain, but it's a reality, right? Most demand planning groups report into supply chain. Do you agree? In your companies, is it different? Any company where demand planning is reporting to sales or marketing or finance? Most companies, demand planning reports into supply chain. So essentially there is a little bit of a love-hate relationship, right, with sales. Although their entire job depends on the sales function, because they have to give them the information. But after some time, they conveniently write off sales intelligence. They're like, oh, these guys always bluff. They always overinflate. They make my forecast very biased. So why should I listen to sales? I have my 27-inch monitor / TV, and I have my statistical models. I'm going to forecast, that's it. That's my forecast. No more sales intelligence, right? That's counterintelligence. So that is a problem, right? Because considering sales as an enemy is a problem, because the same demand planners or supply chain directors also complain that they have very little participation from sales function in the sales and operations planning process, right? They say S&OP process, sales guys don't attend at all. If you don't listen to them, obviously they don't want to come to the meeting, right? So basically, that is a big, big challenge. Now, we are a demand planning consulting company, right? But and we do believe in statistical models. We do a lot of algorithmic work. We do a lot of quantitative work. But still, I would never agree to a process that says no sales function, or we won't listen to sales, right? We're just going to go purely with statistical forecasts. In fact, a lot of actually pundits basically say, oh, statistical forecasts are better than listening to sales. I mean, that's good to hear. I mean, it's nice to hear. Oh my God, it's good. It seems like stats can do everything. But that is actually a pure, clean prescription for failure. Because if you don't bring sales into the fold, your S&OP will definitely fail. Because it's not their forecast. I mean, of course, they would like to bias you, right? They would like to over-forecast because, their bonuses are based on that, right? Because if you come up with a forecast and they don't have product, they can't supply it. They draw an empty face in front of the customer. They definitely don't want that. So they will try to bias, of course, but you should be prepared to question the bias. You cannot just dismiss them saying, don't talk to me, right? Or I won't listen to you, because those are extremes. So essentially, all of these things matter. How often do you meet with sales and marketing? So what is the level at which you forecast? And what is the level at which sales is forecasting? You need to make provision for that, because sales may not really come down all the way to the SKU level. But some salespeople are pretty good. They know their SKUs very well, especially if you go to a sales manager or a sales rep. They carry a big book, and they write down every SKU they sell. They're very religious about it. And they will try to bias you on every SKU they sell. right? Because it's their job, right? So you can't just go against it and say, oh, you are bluffing, right? You have to work with them. You have to show them the facts. You have to tell them, listen, John, that's what you did last time, but you were 20% off. You kind of train them like the Pavlovian dog, right, over time. So, but on the other hand, you just have to work with them. They do have intelligence. They'll tell you everything that you need to know because they live and die by their forecast. Because if you don't listen to the forecast, where else is the forecast going? From sales. Sales management. It'll be going to sales finance, sales planning, and senior managers will be listening to that forecast as well. So we need to develop a way to work with the sales function. Otherwise, demand planning is dead. Right? Demand planning is essentially built on sales intelligence. And the last thing that we realize that works is, do they understand your planning process? Sales. Have you trained them on what you do? Have you trained them on where demand planning is going? Who is using it? Why is it important? And that is actually very, very, very essential. And a lot of companies are embarking on training salespeople on the importance of forecasting so that they can come up with the right forecast, and differentiating between an annual volume plan and a demand plan, because they are two different things. In one of the training sessions that I had for a food company, like a room full of salespeople, and the VP of sales was there as well, we had a quiz, we had an exercise to talk about, how do they change the forecast after, in January, in February, in March, and in August. Most of them said they will keep their forecast close to the budget or the annual volume plan. And the sales VP was blown away. He was like, I don't want you to do that. And they said, oh, we thought, boss, that's what you expected us to do. We wanted to keep the forecast close to the annual plan to make the boss happy, saying that, yeah, whatever is the annual budget, we'll make it. Although they have the more recent information whether they can make it or not. Because those are two different things. One is the annual planning. Once you do it, it's done. The other one is the more recent estimate. That's what needs to get into demand planning, because things change. You are going to either meet your quota or you're not going to meet your quota. Only if the sales management knows you have a risk, they'll come up with other plans and programs. But if you never tell them that, saying that, oh, we can meet the budget until November, you lose the opportunity, right? You lose the market, okay? All right, what about this? Does your management dictate a forecast? You work hard, you come back and you present a forecast, and then you give it to senior management. Obviously, that's a customer, right? And they look at the forecast, and they come up with a number at a very high level. And they say, wow, this all works, assuming that you've dollarized the plan. Otherwise, they won't even look at it. So, 250 million next month? No, we think it's going to be 225. How do you come up with it? Do you have a SKU level detail to back it up? Unfortunately, you cannot ask that question to them. They just write in a piece of paper, 225. Here you go. Change it. That's difficult, right? That's difficult. So when that happens, a lot of things change because it is a one-way street. The dialogue is one way. Management gives you a number, and you cannot question them, or you don't want to question them because you want to still have a job tomorrow. So the reality is what? You just go back to the books, read on the engine, go change everything at the SKU level to make it match $225 million. And if you don't have enough time, but they say, oh, it has to be done by 5 a.m. in the morning. You don't have enough time, what would you do? You would essentially cut the forecast on some of the high-priced items, because it's easy. Just change the forecast on a few items, you match 225. So it results in very many perverse behavior, right? It results in a variety of perverse behavior if you do that. So this is actually also not a good practice. There has to be sufficient notification or sufficient time duration between the management communication and the time for you to reconcile the forecast, because you don't want to do it in a hurry. If SKU level plans get messed up, everything gets messed up from a production planning perspective. So as a demand planner, you should really have the details and the courage to back up your forecast. And I have done this in the past in my corporate life. I have told management, no, that is not correct. 225 is incorrect. I know you have to be brave to do that. But if you have the right explanations, right, you can convince them. Or they can convince you. Right? They can come back and say other things. Only if you talk back. Only if you have the right details. If you have no idea how you came up with 250, then it's all gone, all bets are off. So there is, I believe that even in corporate life, if you have a dialogue, regardless of who the other person is, if you have a dialogue, then you can have your way, right? At least you can have a good dialogue. Not just because you are disagreeing respectfully saying, sir, that's not correct. And this is why it's not correct. The reactionary behavior is going to go change, and this happens very often. When management comes back with a number, people go back and change, changing correctly. And that messes up SKU level plans. So best practice would be, to do what is called as forecast reconciliation. Forecast reconciliation is reconciling your forecast with the other forecast, with meaningful qualitative aspects that say, here is the reason why it's different. Right? Imagine if you're talking to management that's driven by a marketing forecast, right? Marketing actually has a forecast. And the big difference between a marketing forecast and a demand plan is typically marketing plans are driven by what? I'm talking about a typical retail company, typical manufacturer that supplies to retail. Marketing plans are driven by point of sale. They will look at the share forecast, they will look at the point of sale, and that's how they come up with a forecast. So how it's time phased over the year is different from a demand plan. Because a demand plan ultimately is a shipment forecast. You can use orders to forecast it, but still what the customers want. So if you ship out bulk volume, let's say it's either a pipeline, initial fill, or a display, right, that goes out to the stores. Just before holidays, you ship everything out in bulk. That is all going to be in 1 month. Whereas marketing plan is not going to consider that. Marketing plan is going to consider what customers are buying. So which means that is going to be a much smoother forecast. So this could often be a big difference between the two different forecasts. Right? So it could be time phasing. They say 225 this month, but next month they have 275, you have 250. Right? Because it's actually a timing issue. You move from one month to the other. Okay? So forecast reconciliation is important, and you will face this if you have a good working S&OP process or an IBP process. Forecast reconciliation is very important because you are working with other teams that also forecast. So how many forecasts are in a typical organization? Demand plan is one. What about the others? What are the other possible forecasts? Yeah, supplier can have their own forecast, yes.
Warehousing and distribution.
Yeah, they have their own forecast, yes. But those are a little limited forecasts, right? Warehousing distribution is going to be only for the manpower and the resources, right? Sales has its own forecast. Ideally, I would say sales forecast and demand plan should be together, right? If sales and demand plan work together, you would want the sales management to use the demand plan. That is the best practice. Marketing has its own forecast, right? Marketing forecast. Finance has its own forecast, which is the finance, which is also called as the latest estimate, LE, right? Financial forecast.
Product management.
Product management is marketing, right? So basically they have their own forecast. And there is another forecast called the strategic forecast, which may never meet you. Basically, strategic forecast maybe for the next 25 years in yearly buckets, right? So that may never intersect with what you're doing. But it'll be good to have a meeting once a year or so with the strategic planners, right? Because we need to know what they're doing, and they need to know what we're doing. Okay. All right. So now I know I said you have to think about monetizing the plan, right? But you could also overdo it, right? So essentially, right? I'll give you a second to register. After all, it's forecasting, right? So we don't want to overdo stuff. Because at the end of the day, we know that it's going to be wrong. Right? It's never going to be perfect. And the expectation is also not for it being perfect. The expectation is we want it to be approximately right. So which means it is not the same as bean counting exercise. Right? Nobody is expecting you to come up with a specific number that says $225 million, 225,330,425.73, right? No. Finance, yes. But even in finance, actually, they approximate, right? So when it comes to forecasting, they are just looking at approximations. So there's really no point in trying to tie it to anything. And it starts with statistical models, overfitting models, right? Spending so much time on trying to overfit. And this has happened largely because management sometimes teases the planner saying, why do you have a straight line forecast? Right? I don't want a straight line forecast. I've spent like $10 million on SAP. I want you to produce a pattern. Right? So planners are like, they work really hard to make a pattern. Because managers, management will criticize saying, I want to see some pattern. I don't want to see a straight line. And there is this one manager, and it's kind of a very interesting example. She made sure that none of her planners produce a straight line forecast. No forecast should be a straight line. So we played a trick on her. And we actually, for some models, it is difficult to get a pattern, right? You have pattern in the past, but they're not real patterns, they're like chaotic. So what we did was we used a little method in the engine that said, copies the last 12 months and put it in the future. And she loved it. She was like, wow, that's awesome. And she even said that I would like the forecast to look like last year. That's what she wanted, and it was easy. Because there is a method in the system that allows you to mimic last 12 months history into the future. After we told her that's what we did, she was disappointed. She was like, no, I don't want you to do that. I want you to use a statistical model and still come up with a pattern, although there is no pattern in the past. Right? It's chaos in the past. So when you have chaos in your history, it's all over the place, what is your best forecast? Straight line, very good, Linda. It's a straight line, right? You can't just do anything more than that, because if you try to force a pattern, what will happen? You will overstock when you don't need it, and understock when you need it, right? It's possible that's just like, you kind of fluked it, right? So force fitting a high level number to skew level plans, like the $225 million example, that's also overdoing it, right? And management may have said 225, 250 looks a little too high. Maybe it's a casual statement for you to go back and take a look at the forecast saying it was too much. They never meant you to force fit it, right?
Or maybe they know they're losing a customer and they haven't told anybody.
Exactly, that's another possibility, right? That is true. That happens all the time. Because they don't want to create a panic, right?
With a budget cutting, they just even lower them.
Yeah, that's a wish, yes, absolutely. So, working hard to tie the rolling forecast to the annual budget. And that is actually another problem. Remember the sales example that I talked about. People just work very hard to keep it close to the annual budget because they don't want to go say a different number. Because if they say a different number, they have to do more work. Right? They have to explain that, why the number is. But that's your job. That's a demand planner's job, right? To tell them the truth to tell them what the latest situation is and explain why it is. Right? And changing the forecast too much, too often. I mean, of course, you are paid to forecast. That doesn't mean you have to type like Kramer all the time, right? Keep on changing the forecast. What are you doing? Forecasting. Right? So, sometimes a flat forecast is not bad. Sometimes, not all the time. So we have seen other extremes also. We walked into another client, it's a large industrial company based out of Minneapolis, and they had 20,000 SKUs. Every one of them was flat. Stand model, everything was flat. Every single one was flat, including thermostats that have a very beautiful pattern. Right? So thermostats sell when?
In the fall.
In the summer, in the fall, yes. It's just a nice peak, right? Even there, the forecast was shamelessly flat. It just cut through the hill, right? Because that's all the system could produce at that time. So it is okay to have a flat forecast when there is no pattern. But it's not okay to have every forecast to be flat, right? So that means it's a miserable failure of your algorithm. All right, very good. So basically, that's all I have today. So those are some of the pitfalls, and obviously the little commercial for us. So Demand Planning LLC, demandplanning.net is our website if you want to look us up. And most of our clients are national clients, so we would like to have some local clients as well. So in the Boston area. Allow us not to travel too much. So basically, if you want the paper, let me know. Just give me your business card or whatever email address, and we'll definitely send you a PDF copy of the paper. And if you have any other questions or your own I hate forecasting situations, we can talk about it now. How are we doing in terms of time? We are over time.
Thank you. Great job.
All right, thank you. So what is in the bag?
Let's open it. It's an equal APICS Northshore root beer.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yes.
We'll be here tonight, thank you.
And something you guys probably don't know, two things. Today is Mark's birthday.
Happy
birthday.
And it's Diwali, so we're
Oh,
gonna
Wow, that's
happy
amazing.
birthday and happy Diwali.
Wow, that's pretty good. That's very impressive.
Very big
Ken.
Indian holiday, so that's very cool.
Wow.
Yes. There you go.
Ken is almost half Indian. He goes there very often.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ken.
And everyone, please fill out your surveys and drive. Yep. I'll see you at the holiday networking party, December 1st.
December 1st, yes. Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark.